All right, welcome back from our quick break. Up next, we have Shane Barton with CEDIK, the Community Economic Development Initiative of Kentucky. Shane leads a Brownfields Redevelopment Program here at UK in partnership with the Kentucky Energy and Environment Cabinet. Shane, take it away.
Thank you so much, Melissa, and thank everybody for being here at the virtual conference today. And thank you, Jeff. That was an amazing presentation. A little bit of anxiety following you, but I will try to note some places where you sort of captured some of my slides for me. But let's just jump right into this. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about community engagement strategies and some funding opportunities for brownfield development, and really sort of try to tease out the difference between brownfields and some of the other planning that we've talked about, and also some of the similarities between the two. So let's just jump right into this. So really touching on some of the things that Jeff shared here, a little reintroduction to downtown revitalization. The reason we care about downtowns is they are iconic, they're powerful, they're historic. They are the anchors of our stories and our memories. They are multi-generational, as Jeff was sort of pointing out there, that we have these ingrained connections to place, and they are very strong. And one of the reasons is that most downtowns, at least many downtowns, were developed pre-auto. So there is a special focus on a human's ability to navigate those spaces, but there's also a certain level of density that comes with their downtowns. But really kind of the elephant in the room here is the elephant on Main Street, and nearly every Main Street has one. Whether it's a vacant, derelict, abandoned, underutilized building, whether it's a brownfield or not. But every downtown that I have personally worked in has one of these buildings that needs a lot of extra attention to get it reinvestment ready for a community to sort of take over ownership of what it could be. But what we also know is that there are significant barriers to reinvestment, in particular with brownfield properties. And let's sort of jump into that. So a brownfield property really is a property or an expansion or a redevelopment that its reuse may be complicated by the presence, and this is very important, or the potential presence of a hazardous substance. So you can imagine what we're really talking about here are nearly every building. In fact, many old buildings are going to have lead and asbestos, which does signify that it could be a brownfield property. But we're talking about old schools, old banks, gas stations, all of those properties, not just industrial practices or in Eastern Kentucky, our buildings are properties that are related to abandoned mine lands. But really, when we're talking about brownfields, it is much more mundane than sort of what our mind often goes to. But what I want to distinguish here is that I'm going to be using brownfields both interchangeably as a program, but also as sites. Because really there is a broader brownfield program that helps address some of these properties, but technically we will also be talking about sites as brownfields as well. But why is this important now? Well, one is we have a long legacy of these buildings that are impacting communities, but the other thing is we are facing a historic level of funding that is coming to our communities. I often joke that there is a tsunami of cash headed to communities from the federal government. So over the next 5 years, we're going to start to see a lot more grants at a lot higher amounts. And a lot of these, in particular with brownfields, they are targeting underserved and new applicants, underserved communities. But the other thing that I love to see, in particular with the brownfields program, is that there is a focus really on community-led revitalization efforts, which makes sort of those connections and coming together and the engagement piece even more critical as we think about how we start to shift the narrative and redevelop some of these places that have often lingered on the landscape. Okay, but in terms of benefits of brownfield redevelopment, I'll break this into two groups, really the community and then the developer. And developer I'm using broadly, not just on the private side, but the developer could be a nonprofit, it could be even a municipality or a philanthropic organization. But in terms of the benefits for the community, we're really talking about improvements around economic health and environmental health, cleaning contaminants, raising those local tax bases, hopefully creating good sustaining jobs, reusing and leveraging existing infrastructure, preventing sprawl. And often these provide us a great opportunity to really dive into social equity and environmental justice, because in particular in communities of color that have experienced sort of the impacts of environmental injustice over generations, this is a great way to start to bridge those conversations and have real conversations about how we move forward and acknowledge those issues. But for developers, they often get the benefits of a reduced price because there may be some kind of contamination or perceived contamination. Often they can work with their local municipalities to get some tax incentives, or maybe even their state. Because those infrastructure elements were connected, they are often in prime locations. Remember earlier today, folks were talking about those riverfront properties. Oftentimes we'll find brownfields in those riverfronts, which are perfect for redevelopment and creating great community spaces. Sometimes they do take they do take sort of a need almost to change some zoning or land use provisions, depending on what that final use could be. But most importantly, when you can have public support or potential partnerships, it really can help move things forward. But what I really love, I love the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services definition, and I found this in their redevelopment benefits, cleaning up and investing in land use sites. It's in one of their toolkits, but they use the acronym PROFIT. Protect the health of communities, removes development pressures off of undeveloped land, optimizes the reuse of existing infrastructure, facilitates job growth, increases local tax bases, and transforms the environment into healthy and safe places. This really captures sort of where my heart often lands when I'm thinking about brownfield redevelopment. But let's sort of think about what are we actually talking about here. This is a very basic description, and you know, if you're familiar with any sorts of community development, you know it is never this simple. It is way more complicated than this. But I really want to encourage everyone to think about the Brownfield program as a redevelopment tool, as opposed to just a mechanism to clean up contaminated sites. But like through using this redevelopment tool, what we're really trying to do is we're trying to create a community-owned vision, but we're trying to reduce the risk because all of the uncertainty around properties and communities and future uses and visions, funding, that creates certain levels of risk that in some cases are really hard to overcome. So let's jump in sort of to the process and talk through this a little bit more. It really starts and ends with engaging communities and stakeholders. So what we're really talking about is ownership, broad ownership, not only of things, but of ideas and concepts. This drives the long-term vision. And believe me, if communities feel like they own an idea, you are going to have a higher success rate and long-term success rate. But what we're really aiming at is we want a long-term vision that ultimately reflects the real needs of the community. And that is why it's so important to engage community where they are. But the other important piece here is that when we start to engage early and often, we often will establish a team of committed champions who are willing and able to move things forward. We all know everyone is committed. In rural communities, everyone wears multiple hats. But trying to find that committed team who can really move things forward and commit to things can sometimes be a challenge. But we often identify them early in this process when we're engaging folks. And just to draw your attention to the pictures, here are a couple sort of really creative engagement opportunities we've hosted. One on the bottom is our Chalk and Talk, which is a very sort of temporary, quick and easy way to sort of infuse some creativity, some informality, and invite people to share ideas. The other is a photo preference table where folks are literally going through and voting on the types of aesthetic that they would love to see in their community. But let's talk about engaging and talk about what that means. I know there are a lot of words on here and it was hard to capture this. On the right-hand side, you'll see sort of those more traditional engagement processes. These can often be a little stale. Let's just be honest. It takes a very skilled facilitator and organizer to make these effective. It's not always the easiest, but what we're really talking about here are those public meetings, public forums, the focus groups, the key informant interviews. Let's just be honest, sometimes a community's public engagement is literally just the announcement in the paper of record, which doesn't get us very far at all when we're thinking about developing ownership. Sometimes it's talking about strengths and weaknesses or looking at trends. Everybody loves a good Google form survey, or even a more in-depth planning process like a charrette. But what I want to invite you to think about are more creative engagement process, those that really kind of activate spaces, they activate people, they create connections, they let people get to know each other, they sort of build bonds within a community that we have long lost. But when I think about some of my favorite creative engagements, it starts with family events that have music, food, that have all the partners there. There's usually an underwriter or a sponsor who's making it happen or helping it make happen. But these are great ways, informal ways to really bring people together. We love walking tours, anything that we can bring people together to get active together, walking their community, whether they're inventorying buildings, whether they're talking about or inventorying walkability or accessibility issues, sidewalks, curb cuts, all of those things, and having broad conversations. It's amazing when people can sort of take those tours and walk together. Also, there's some wonderful mapping exercises where you can use Legos to think about density and redevelopment. In particular, when we're thinking about walking tours, we've had groups have great success with building inventories, so that it isn't just some leader in some office creating a map, that these maps are really created together and the details are really pulled together collectively from all the people. We know storytelling is important, whether you're doing story circles or ripple effect mapping, thinking about the connections of people in place, in particular with historic communities or historic places, trying to think about those intergenerational and multi-generational connections to place can often help us think about what we want there in the future. Again, being creative and drawing images or writing future headlines gets people thinking about the future that they would love for others to know about them. Like I mentioned previously, the photo affinity or visual speaks. Anytime we can look at pictures and say, I like that or I don't like that, and have conversations always works. But the other idea around, community photography and having folks literally take pictures of the things that they cherish or the treasures that they want to preserve and showcase. Some communities do lunch with the mayor, lunch with the planning department, lunch with the co-op, right? These are great opportunities for a little more informal way to kind of do community-based key informant interviews where folks can really get to know each other. Then again, pop-up events and temporary events or installations, whether we're talking tactical urbanism that are testing out bike lanes or gardens or public spaces. But also, we've had great success with some of our students at the University of Kentucky using virtual reality to create a temporary experience for folks to literally put on goggles and traverse through an environment that doesn't exist, but they can imagine. There are some others sort of globally that I would love to share here, in particular, Grassroots Comics out of India. This is a great organization that focuses in very rural, impoverished communities to think about and engaging young people in drawing comics that tell the story of their community or that focus on problems that they're trying to address. And then again, thinking about the youth, engaging organizations that exist like youth problem solvers in your school system to approach some of the wicked problems that we see in our communities is always a great idea as well. But the second piece in this brownfield process, after we began to engage, and I don't want to try to convey that engagement starts and stops there. Engagement really should carry through this entire process. In fact, the map on the right was a community engagement process where folks walked the city of Harlan in eastern Kentucky and began to map all of the buildings that were occupied or vacant to get a sense of what their directions could be as they prioritize either promoting or trying to attract investments in those. So once we identify and assess, it really gives us an opportunity to start the brownfield assessment. And those really began with phase 1 and phase 2 assessments, where we're trying to determine, is there an opportunity or is there a high probability that this property could qualify as a brownfield and has been impacted by some sort of previous use or contamination. When we start to move into the actual redevelopment planning, this coordinated development, looking at our findings, or thinking about our cleanup options and what the community really wants, it gets a little more complicated because depending on the type of use that we hope to create, it really does dictate the type or level of cleanup that is needed. So you can imagine residential properties require a much more substantial level of cleanup because people are in their homes all the time, where an industrial use may have a lower standard of cleanup because just the practice of the new land use. Okay? But I do want to take a moment just to pause, because when we're thinking about redevelopment planning in rural communities, we cannot ignore displacement or gentrification, right? We know, and in particular have seen this as the pandemic started in 2020, that as costs rise, it becomes more expensive to live in any community. But I want to bring your attention to the EPA's website on strategies to minimize displacement. They have a great group of documents there that I would suggest you check out if this is on your mind. But one thing I will say is that ultimately it takes political will to implement these. It takes time, it takes resources. And we know, just like a tree, the best time to plant a tree was yesterday. The best time to think about displacement and putting in proactive policies was before displacement begins to happen. So, as we think about reinvestment and redevelopment, I don't want this concept to get lost, because in particular in Eastern Kentucky, we are starting to think about this a lot more. More community members are thinking about it, in particular as we're trying to recover from some devastating floods that wiped out a lot of housing in our communities. But the last piece that I really want to spend some time on here is the funding piece. Brownfields can be complicated. They can be complicated to fund, they can be complicated to navigate, but let's sort of go through some funding mechanisms just to give you a sense, okay? So when we often think of brownfields, these are the sorts of funding that comes to mind. Assessment grants to do inventories or planning, cleanup grants, the description's in the name. They're often utilized to clean up or do some environmental remediation. Multi-purpose grants are really assessment cleanups that can involve one or more. There's often revolving loan funds with low interest loans or sub-grants. Sometimes states will waive those if you've paid so many years on them. There's some technical assistance that can often be provided by the EPA. There's job training grants that really provides job training around or to residents that are impacted not only by the properties, but whose training is really directed at those properties. One thing that we often face in Eastern Kentucky and rural Kentucky is that we don't have the skilled trades. We don't have the engineer, the architect, the folks who can restore historic windows, the folks who can put a flat membrane roof on a historic building, and we have to bring those in from outside. So by focusing on these job training programs, we can build up the skills of folks to address and redevelop and sort of put their energy in these spaces and make them better for the entire community, while also sort of leaving a mark there. But in Kentucky specifically, we have the Cleaner Commonwealth Fund, which is our revolving loan fund for brownfield cleanups. Now, I'm going to move through this fairly quickly, but I would also invite you to check out the 2021 Brownfield Federal Programs Guide. There will be a new one coming out this year. This really breaks down all of the federal agencies that have available funding or technical assistance that plays well with brownfields funding. And as you may know, not all federal funds play well together. So it's good to sort of take a look at this to know what you're getting into. But one thing I want to emphasize here is that no matter what funding stream you use, that local investments, those initial investments, either from municipalities, nonprofits, or foundations that then seed additional monies or are leveraged to sort of seek additional monies, are key, because it really does demonstrate an organizational commitment. Because no one, like I say here, no one wants to be the first and only investor in some of these ideas. So I'm just going to go through these fairly briefly, and you can see, Department of Commerce and Economic Development Administration, National Oceanic and Atmosphere, U.S. Army Corps, Department of Energy. They all have opportunities that you can overlay with brownfields. Same with Department of Health and Human Services, HUD, Department of Interior, surface mining, here with some of the AML funds that are going to be coming into our communities. Those job training grants from the Department of Labor, Transportation, EPA, obviously, National Endowments for the Arts, in particular when we're thinking about infusing creative placemaking into these projects. But what I want to remind you as I wrap up here is that if you begin to go down the brownfield process and starting to navigate this and start to seek funding, there are 4 major ranking criteria for your application. It starts with community need, the description, the community engagement, and the project benefits. But what we keep hearing is that the idea of community engagement and that redevelopment plan is critical as the EPA and the reviewers are looking at these grants. So I want you, and I implore you to really put some energy into how you communicate, how you engage, and how you bring that sort of redevelopment vision forward. And then lastly, I just want to make some reminders here. You got to have fun. You got to make this stuff fun. It can't be stuffy. It can't be stale. Engage early and often. Carry those opportunities to create connections all the way through. And I will remind you that all of these projects move at the speed of trust. If you are unable to build trust in your community, your project and your efforts are probably not going to go very far. It takes community champions and a community-driven development vision. You really have to stack capital. You got to bring a lot of resources together, and that these redevelopment plans that we often work on, they have much more, or they serve a lot more purposes beyond brownfield redevelopment. And with that, I say thank you, and I'm looking forward to your all's questions after the panel. Thank you.
Shane, we've had a question of just in general, is it only a government entity able to apply, or can another organization access brownfields? Just how does that process work?
That is a great question, and it is often one that confuses people. So when we're thinking about folks who can access brownfield development, it is government entities. So municipalities are often the first that come to mind. But I also want to remind folks that nonprofits, 501c3s, philanthropic organizations, quasi-government organizations, it is fairly broad. It does not just have to be your city, but often the municipality is the linchpin in the redevelopment process, because if you're going to have to seek zoning variances or land use shifts, that really does, it's going to be dependent on their support.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for all the information. And I know you'll be available in the chat if people have other questions about brownfields, but this is a good example of an engagement process that can lead to funding. So thank you very much for sharing. Next, we're going to have Leah Hamilton. Leah develops curriculum and teaches arts emergency management and cultural policy for the Arts Administration Department at UK. Recent extreme weather events in Kentucky have underscored the importance of community networks for increased readiness and recovery. Her presentation will discuss building relationships with artists and arts and culture organizations around disaster preparedness, extreme events to build more disaster-ready communities. Leah?
Thank you so much. Let me just share my screen here. Go into present mode. Okay. Hi, everyone. I am honored and delighted to be with you this afternoon. And Shane highlighted and provided such a great foundation for what I'll be talking about today, which is directly related to creative engagement, particularly how we can collaborate with the arts and culture sector when it comes to community disaster preparedness and resiliency. Just a little side note about my background. I started out as a musician, and was born in the Ozarks in southern Missouri, and was born and raised in rural and small city areas. And I ran the leading arts agency in southern Missouri, which served 27 counties before I moved into university life. And it was during my time working in southern Missouri with arts and culture that I experienced emergencies, everyday ones, from busted pipes to severe weather events, to helping communities recover from disaster events. When I was working at the Arts Council, was when in 2011, an F5 tornado hit Joplin, Missouri. And for the sake of time, I'm actually not going to play this video this afternoon, but I can share the link with my slide deck. And it does tell a story about the mural program in Joplin, Missouri, partnering with artists, but also, again, related to what Shane was talking about, creative engagement. It was a public mural that people in the beginning said they didn't want this mural to be related to the disaster because most people in the community experienced losing family members or damaged assets. But it ended up, there were pieces of memories from the tornado that came into the public art piece in this mural. And it tells a story about how the arts really can be used as a sense of therapy and community reflection for those that have experienced disaster events. But also, it's not just partnering with arts and culture when it comes to recovery. That, of course, is one aspect, but partnering with arts and cultural organizations and artists can only happen if artist studios and arts and cultural organizations are physically there and are thriving. And my research looks into how prepared arts organizations and artists are for emergency situations. And what we know is that most organizations don't have a disaster or an emergency plan. They haven't made contact and don't know often people that are related to emergency management agencies. Even these organizations, and this includes urban and rural and small city organizations that have experienced a crisis situation, they still don't have a plan in place even after a disaster occurs. So it shows that there are some issues here in the arts and culture community. There's a lack of time, a lack of knowledge, and lack of resources when it comes to emergency planning. And of course, I think many of you can relate to this, that planning for potential emergencies sort of creates this strange paradox, where, resource-strapped organizations, they're asked to dedicate limited resources to prepare for something that may or may not happen. And so out of necessity, nonprofits in the arts and culture sector prioritize the more immediate and concrete over future and theoretical disaster events that could happen. And of course, when resources are scarce, as they most always are in small businesses, whether private or nonprofit or public, planning for emergency scenarios it just naturally doesn't take priority. So what I have been working towards in many national and statewide arts councils and researchers, what we've been finding is that there's this gap of communication between emergency management resources and agencies and arts and culture and the sector. And while it is getting better, there are still policies, like nationally with the Federal Emergency Management Agency with FEMA, that don't consider unique aspects of the creative industries. And it's not purposeful exclusion, it's just that the knowledge of specific and unique needs in the arts and culture community just isn't there yet. And that includes not allowing some artists or cultural entities to apply for disaster assistance funding. There's a lack of including artists and arts and cultural managers at community disaster planning meetings and events, and just generally a lack of collaboration when it comes to possible projects. And when I talk about arts and culture and creative industries, I like showing this nice visual. This is not something I created, but I think it highlights here in the orange. These are the various types of arts and cultural businesses that you could consider in your town. And in the green are the various sectors in towns that we can consider for partnerships. And I know Shane highlighted that well, how great it is to use community festivals as a neutral space to engage with different groups of people. So I wanted to direct your attention to a guide that came out in 2020 through FEMA called Connecting Mitigation and Arts and Culture. Not only does it give great examples of collaborative projects regarding risk communications for disaster preparedness, mitigation, and also recovery projects, but it highlights just how important the arts and culture sector is to rural communities, small cities. Something I want to highlight is that in this guide, it highlights that in 2017, the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis reported that arts and cultural production accounted for over $804 billion, or 4.3% of the United States economy. And I mention this because this is a larger percentage than that of the transportation, tourism, and agricultural sectors, not put together, but each of them separately. And now in 2021, when the more recent data came out, it's 4.4% of the United States economy. So the arts and culture sector has an important piece, of course, of the economic benefits of a community, but also can be used towards better community preparedness and mitigation. So in the guide, there's a few projects I wanted to show as great examples. This particular one is in Boulder, Colorado. It's a flood level marker near Boulder Creek, and it was a memorial to an individual, Gilbert White, who was a highly regarded floodplain management researcher and geographer. And this was made of recycled glass. It was actually created by his daughter, who's a glass artist, in partnership with the designer of the Sister City Plaza, Christian Mueller, in Boulder. And this is a mural found on a building downtown in Rock Rapids, Iowa, by Matthew Sharam. I hope I'm pronouncing his last name correctly. That was painted as a memorial to those affected by the 2014 flood of the Rock River. And while I know Denver is not considered rural or small, I think this is a great example of a recent mitigation project that was actually funded by federal and local dollars. Artist and skateboarder Matt Barton designed this space called Community Forms, and it's part public art, it's part play space, and it's also part stormwater mitigation. And it's located on a 25-acre former yellow cab site just north of downtown Denver. That was a place that was often prone to flooding by the South Platte River. So it's about 100 feet by 30 feet. It opened in 2021. It cost an estimated $100,000. Again, I know we're talking Denver here, but it was partially funded with a $34,000 grant through FEMA as part of their Arts and Mitigation Fund. And this project was the first grant from FEMA for this type of work, and the agency has said that it is interested in funding more projects like this. So there are many ways that our communities can work with the arts and culture sector to help build preparedness and resiliency, whether it's through festival community gatherings, pop-up concerts, plays, dances. It can be marketing campaigns, or infrastructure projects like I just mentioned. And of course, there's various issues related to disasters, not just natural disasters, but of course could be, more recently in our minds, of course, could be COVID-19 and any future pandemics, cultural preservation, social issues in a community related to health and mental health, diversity issues, and food and water security. Right before I end my presentation and open for questions, I also wanted to highlight some of the organizations that are currently working with communities, trying to partner artists and arts and cultural organizations with other sectors in the community. There's the National Coalition for Arts Preparedness and Emergency Response. That's a long one. I've been saying it a lot lately. That's NCAPER for short. The Performing Arts Readiness Project actually offers grants to all sizes of communities to start building networks with various sectors in a community with arts and culture on mitigation projects. And then there is Surf Plus, which is for over 30 years has been working with artists and studios and projects for disaster preparedness. And lastly, I wanted to share that there is now a dedicated person working at FEMA with the cultural heritage sector. Lori Foley is that individual, and she works to help connect arts and cultural communities to federal resources through FEMA. So we're seeing some progress in this area, and it would be great to be able to feature more projects in your own communities for future presentations. So thank you very much for having me and for your time. And Melissa, I'll send it back to you for questions.
Thank you so much, Leah. We do have a question for you. And so for people who feel like building a whole emergency plan just feels overwhelming and exhausting, what are the most practical first steps that you could suggest? And Shane, Leah, I'd love for you to answer this, but Shane, maybe from the Brownfields perspective too, I imagine going forward, a lot of the rehabilitated spaces will need some kind of mitigation plan. So what are just your initial first steps and first advice for people?
Yes, it is overwhelming, and you don't have to start from scratch. There are many resources and templates. One that I would encourage if you are in the arts and culture sector is D-Plan, and I can put the link in the give that to you. But it's through Arts Ready, and it actually can be either free or a small fee, and you put in information that is custom about your organization, and this online tool helps you develop an emergency plan. And it's pretty quick and easy to use, and it was designed that way to be easy. It was designed actually for small and mid-sized organizations in mind. So that would be where I would go, is don't start from scratch. That's overwhelming. And there are a lot of great templates that you can build off of that you can then customize to your own organization.
Thank you. And Shane?
I think there's a couple intersections here. I think when we think about brownfields and natural disasters in particular, one, I mentioned the extreme flooding we experienced in Eastern Kentucky last year. But one thing to remind folks is that mold is a contaminant and can sort of be used and can be thought of as a contaminant that you can leverage brownfield redevelopment monies or processes with. The other piece is sort of going back to the inventory and the redevelopment planning, is that I'm a firm believer in to be able to do something, you have to know what you have. And to have a very firm inventory of available spaces of buildings that may be in a floodplain. If you're like our mountainous communities, nearly every development 100 years ago was in a floodplain, and most of our high ground is not accessible. So having a sense and just being informed about what the opportunities may be, but also maybe even more importantly, as you move through that redevelopment plan on those specific buildings or sites, be cognizant of what you can do on site to help alleviate impacts from natural disaster or other disasters, whether it means really modeling effective stormwater management, or thinking about decentralized power or solar, the things that you can do on an individual site that really can give you a leg up when it hits the fan, per se, in the middle of a natural disaster.
I know from the recent flooding that we experienced in Kentucky last year, and then we had tornadoes in the West the year before, the way that this conversation, we realized through our national partners, this is not just in Kentucky, it is a national challenge that rural communities especially are just really facing and experiencing. No one wants to plan for the worst, but it comes. So Leah, how would you communicate the importance of being prepared to business owners or to organizations?
Well, there's two prongs to it. One is that there's like this idea of absolute and relative cost. And what I mean by that is, let's say you want a defibrillator for your facility. It's going to cost the same amount of money, whether you have 80 people that work for your business or 8 people, or maybe it's all volunteer. It's all going to cost the same. And so that is a barrier to some preparedness strategies and things you may want to have, but just your sheer financial resources or your time just isn't there. And the flip side of that is, with relative costs, let's say you have 2 employees and you lose 1 employee because, and this has happened, that their home in this tragic disaster was destroyed, and therefore they are out and not working for possibly weeks or months on end. Well, that is, again, relative, a very significant issue in terms of being able to keep your business running. And so that can just show you how preparedness is important, and it's worth trying to slowly budget money over time and dedicate time. But again, having worked in rural communities and understanding the the networks of people working together, I think that's something that I notice, and I think is the most beautiful aspect of living in a smaller area, is that people know people, neighbors know neighbors, and are willing to help. So it's just creating a little bit of a shift, that instead of making that the response of neighbor to neighbor help, make it part of a mitigation strategy, make it part of preparedness, is that you've created that network ahead of time. Maybe you can't buy a defibrillator, but maybe you know someone that has one, or knows someone who there's a grant or a donation that would be willing to be made. So I think the key is building the networks ahead of time and thinking through what kind of organizations or people or neighbors or mayor or whomever it may be can help you should something happen, like a flood or a tornado to your business.
Thank you. I know in a lot of our communities in Kentucky that experienced disaster, one thing that was very surprising to folks is it's not just a certain type of industry that's hit. One key thing that happened is for historical courthouses, churches, records offices. There's a lot of organizations in a community that maintain historic records of some kind. So we've seen a lot of scrambling to learn how to preserve those and what to do. Do you have any tips for people in here who maybe work with their historical society or their county clerk's office or their church records, something along those lines on what they should do for those old parchment or historical items?
Yes, there are resources out there. And interestingly, as you were talking about the Kentucky situation, what happened when archives were destroyed by water damage is, the spontaneous network of archivists and historical preservationists from across the state, came into certain areas like the Hindman Settlement School to say, okay, here is how you can freeze the paper. So it's, over time, then we can preserve it there, because there are different strategies and methods to preserving archives that have been damaged. So it kind of goes back to this idea of networking. And what's interesting is this network of archivists and preservationists, now there is a formal name for this network, and the network is trying to get grant funding so that it can respond to future disaster events. I think it's okay if I give the name. It's KERN, Kentucky Heritage Emergency Responder Network, right? I think I got KERN. So I think we're going to start seeing these networks become more formalized, and we'll see them being more helpful so that we know who to call, because sometimes you don't have all the knowledge you need. Sometimes you don't know what knowledge you need, because it's unimaginable sometimes what these disasters can do. But knowing and having a communications, even a contact sheet of, what emergency responders exist in your sector, in your field, having that available so that you can say, I don't know what to do, but can you help? And they're networked too. And before you know it, the people that have that knowledge can come and help.
Thank you so much. I appreciate both of you taking the time to share this information with us today. No one wants to worry about a disaster, or sometimes it may not be the most fun thing to think about these big scale brownfields projects that seem insurmountable. But I think these are really important elements to share with our community. So thank you both for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
we're going to go ahead and back out of this session. And I want to remind you that through the day, if you haven't gotten a chance yet to hop over to ruralplacemaking.com to check out our toolkit that we've been discussing today, please do so, because there's a lot of resources there that have been shared today, all organized under 4 major categories. And then there's also a lot of other resources that you may not have seen yet, but that are over there. And we tried to build all of them to be replicable in rural communities just like yours. So we'll take a quick break and we'll see you back for our final session.